Okay, picture this: I'm lying in a hospital bed, barely conscious, tubes everywhere, the sterile smell of disinfectant filling my nostrils, and the last thing I hear before I drift off completely is my own parents, the two people who are supposed to love and protect me unconditionally, asking the doctor, in a hushed but incredibly clear whisper that somehow cut through the haze of pain and medication, can we swap her organ to save our son instead? Let that sink in for a moment. Not, is our daughter okay? Or, what can we do to help her? But a cold, calculating question about using my body, my organs, to save my brother. Was I wrong to feel like my entire world had just shattered into a million irreparable pieces in that very instant? Tell me, honestly, if you would have felt any differently, if you would have seen them the same way ever again after a betrayal like that. I guess to truly understand how we got to that horrific moment, I need to take you back, way back to the beginning. My name is Alara, and I have always been, for lack of a better term, the other child. My younger brother, Liam, was the golden boy, the miracle child, the one who could do no wrong. From the moment he was born, he was the center of my parents' universe, and I, just 2 years older, quickly learned my place on the periphery. It wasn't overt neglect, not in a way that social services would ever bat an eye at, but it was a constant, knowing feeling of being secondary. Liam was showered with praise for every small achievement, every drawing, every decent grade. I, on the other hand, had to practically win the Nobel Prize to get a fleeting nod of approval. If I brought home an A, it was expected. If Liam brought home a B, it was celebrated as a sign of his unique, burgeoning genius. This dynamic wasn't just at home, it permeated every aspect of our lives. Family holidays were planned around Liam's interests. His school projects got all the attention, while mine were often forgotten until the last minute. When he got sick, it was an emergency, a full-blown crisis. When I got sick, it was usually met with a sigh and a suggestion to rest in my room. It wasn't that they didn't care about me at all. It was just that their capacity for care and affection seemed to be almost entirely consumed by Liam. I rationalized it for years. He was younger, more sensitive, perhaps needed more attention. I told myself I was the strong one, the independent one, and that's why they didn't need to worry about me as much. But deep down, it hurt, a constant ache that I tried desperately to ignore. Liam, for his part, was an effortlessly charming kid. He knew how to work my parents, how to get what he wanted with a dimpled smile and a perfectly timed hug. He wasn't malicious, not intentionally. He was just a product of his environment, thriving in the spotlight his parents constantly shone on him. He grew up believing, rightly so, that he was special, that he deserved the best, and that his needs superseded everyone else's. And honestly, it's hard to blame him. My parents fostered that belief every single day of his life. He was a bright kid, academically gifted, and athletically inclined. He excelled at everything he tried, which only fueled my parents' adoration. I, on the other hand, was more artistic, more introverted. I loved to draw, to write stories, to lose myself in books. These were hobbies my parents indulged, but never truly celebrated with the same fervor they did Liam's soccer trophies, or his perfect math scores. I tried to connect with them, to show them my drawings, my poems, to talk about the worlds I created, but their eyes would often glaze over. Or they'd nod vaguely and then steer the conversation back to Liam's latest accomplishment. I learned early on that my passions weren't theirs, and I stopped trying to share them, retreating further into my own creative spaces. As we grew older, the disparity only widened. Liam was diagnosed with a chronic kidney condition in his early teens. It wasn't immediately life-threatening, but it was serious, requiring careful management and the understanding that, eventually, he would likely need a transplant. This diagnosis, understandably, devastated my parents. It also intensified their focus on Liam to an almost unbearable degree. Every meal was meticulously planned to suit his dietary restrictions. Every outing was contingent on his energy levels. Every conversation revolved around his health, his appointments, his future. My own life, my struggles with school, my friendships, my nascent relationships, all faded into the background, deemed ins of Liam's serious medical condition. I felt a strange mix of emotions: profound sadness for my brother, of course, but also a creeping resentment for how his illness had completely erased my own existence in my parents' eyes. I knew it was selfish, knew I shouldn't feel that way, but the loneliness was suffocating. I started spending more and more time out of the house, at friends' places, or just wandering aimlessly, anywhere to escape the suffocating atmosphere of our home. When Liam was about 20, his condition worsened significantly. The doctors informed us that he was approaching end-stage renal failure, and would need a kidney transplant within the next year. The news hit our family like a meteor. My parents were distraught, beside themselves with worry. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach, not just for Liam, but for what this meant for me. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone what was coming. The conversations started subtly at first. Have you ever considered organ donation, Elara? My mother would ask casually over dinner, her eyes flickering towards me. It's a noble thing, to help someone in need. My father would chime in, talking about the importance of family, of sacrifice, of doing whatever it takes to save a loved one. They never explicitly said Liam's name, but the implication hung heavy in the air, a thick, suffocating fog. I would usually change the subject, try to deflect, pretend I didn't understand what they were getting at. But they were relentless. The pressure slowly ratcheted up, a constant, unspoken expectation that I, as his sister, would be the first in line to offer. They eventually started talking about testing. It's just a preliminary screening, Elara, my father urged, trying to sound reasonable. Just to see if you're even a match. No commitment, of course. My mother added, think of how much it would mean to Liam, to all of us. I was scared. Terrified actually. Not just of the surgery, but of what it would mean for my identity, my autonomy. Would I just be a walking organ donor to them? Would my worth truly be reduced to my biological compatibility with my brother? Despite my fears, I reluctantly agreed to get tested. A part of me, the part that still yearned for their approval, for their love, hoped that if I did this, if I offered this ultimate sacrifice, perhaps then I would finally be seen, finally be loved unconditionally. I was a match. A perfect, uncomfortably perfect match. The news, when it came, was met with tears of joy from my parents, hugs. For Liam, it was a lifeline for me. It felt like a sentence. The weeks leading up to the scheduled surgery were a blur of appointments, consultations, and more emotional appeals. My parents, now openly discussing the transplant as a given, praised my generosity, my selflessness. They told me how proud they were, how I was saving Liam's life, how I was their hero. The words felt hollow. They were praising the act of donation, not me. I tried to express my anxieties, my fears about the recovery, about the risks. My mother dismissed them with a wave of her hand. You're strong, Elara. You'll bounce back in no time. Think of Liam, what he's going through. My father reminded me of my duty as a sister. It was clear that my feelings, my well-being, were secondary to Liam's survival. I felt trapped, caught in a current that was pulling me further and further away from myself. There was no escape, no easy way to say no without shattering my already fragile relationship with my parents, without being branded as selfish, uncaring. I resigned myself to it, telling myself it was the right thing to do, that I would be saving my brother's life, that I would eventually feel good about it. The day of the surgery arrived, a cold, gray morning that felt appropriately bleak. I remember the sterile smell of the hospital, the crisp white sheets, the distant hum of medical equipment. My parents were there, of course, their faces itched with worry for Liam, but also with a strange, almost triumphant air, as if a great hurdle was finally being cleared. They hugged me, told me they loved me, but their eyes kept darting towards the door, waiting for news about Liam, who was scheduled for his surgery at the same time in an adjacent operating room. I remember the anesthesiologist explaining the procedure, his voice a calm drone, as the IV was inserted into my arm. I remember the gradual descent into unconsciousness, a heavy, velvet curtain falling over my senses, and then, the faint, disembodied voices, the feeling of being pulled back, slowly, painfully, to awareness, the incredible, searing pain in my side, the tubes, the beeping monitors, the dry mouth, and then, the words that would forever define my relationship with my parents. The words that tore through my healing body and my already wounded soul. Can we swap her organ to save our son instead? I wasn't supposed to hear it. I was supposed to completely out of it, lost in the drug-induced haze. But for a brief, agonizing moment, I was lucid enough, just enough, to catch their voices. My mother's whisper, clear as a bell, followed by my father's low, urgent agreement. They were talking to the doctor, their backs partially turned to my bed, oblivious to the fact that their unconscious daughter was actually absorbing every horrifying syllable. The doctor, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Evans, looked startled, her voice hushed as she responded, Mr. and Mrs. Davies, I understand your concern, but Elara's kidney has already been removed and successfully transplanted into Liam. The procedures are complete. And even if they weren't, we couldn't just swap organs like that. It's not how it works. My mother, clearly agitated, pressed, but he's still so weak. He's not responding well. What if his body rejects it? Elara is strong, she'll recover. Can't we just give him hers if he needs another one? My father added, yes, she has two. He only has one that's failing. It only makes sense. The doctor, sounding increasingly uncomfortable, tried to explain medical ethics, the impossibility of what they were suggesting, the fact that the surgery was already over. But my parents weren't listening. They were consumed by their singular obsession, Liam. They wanted to ensure his survival, at any cost, even if it meant further dismembering their other child, who lay mere feet away, bleeding and broken. The sheer, unadulterated horror of it washed over me, colder than any operating room. They weren't just asking for my other kidney, they were asking for my very essence, my continued existence, to be secondary, dispensable, if it meant guaranteeing Liam's life. I wanted to scream, to cry, to lash out, but I was too weak, too shattered. The pain in my side, which had been a dull throb, intensified into a sharp, piercing agony, mirroring the pain in my heart. The world faded again, this time into a much darker, more profound unconsciousness. When I truly woke up, it was hours later. The pain still there, but muted by medication. Dr. Evans was checking on me, her expression a mixed concern and something else, pity. I didn't say anything about what I'd heard. I couldn't. The words were a lead weight in my stomach, a secret too heavy to share, too painful to acknowledge. My parents eventually came in, their faces still drawn with worry, but also with a new, fragile relief. Liam's surgery had been successful, the transplant seemed to be taking. They hugged me, told me how grateful they were, how I was their hero. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. I smiled weakly, nodded, and mumbled something about being glad Liam was okay. Inside, a wall had gone up, thick and impenetrable, between me and them. I had given them a part of myself, literally, and they had responded by casually discussing taking even more, seeing me as nothing more than a spare part. The emotional wound was far deeper than the surgical one. My recovery was difficult, both physically and emotionally. The physical pain was manageable with medication, but the emotional pain was constant, an insidious burn that wouldn't go away. My parents continued to fuss over Liam, who was also recovering, but far more slowly than I was. His body was taking its time adjusting to the new organ, and there were complications. My parents spent every waking moment at his bedside, checking on him, talking to doctors, bringing him his favorite foods. They would visit me occasionally, usually for a few minutes, to ask how I was doing, before hurrying back to Liam. Their concern for my well-being felt performative, a duty rather than genuine care. I watched them, detached from behind my newly constructed wall. I saw their joy when Liam showed small improvements, their despair when he had setbacks. And all I could think was, they would have let me die to save him, without a second thought. This thought was a poison, slowly spreading through my veins, contaminating every memory, every interaction I had ever had with them. I realized then that I had spent my entire life chasing their love, trying to earn it, trying to prove myself worthy. And in the end, it was clear I never would be. I was just a resource, a means to an end. My friends were a lifeline during this time. They visited me, brought me books, listened patiently to my vague complaints about feeling off and distant from my family. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the full extent of what I had heard. It felt too raw, too shameful, too unbelievable. How could I explain that my own parents had wanted to harvest my other kidney, while I was still recovering from the first donation? They wouldn't understand. They would tell me I was imagining things, that my parents would never do that. But I knew what I had heard. And that knowledge was isolating. I spent my days in the hospital and later at home, retreating further into myself, into my books, into my art. I started drawing again, pouring all my pain, all my anger, all my disillusionment into my sketchbooks. The characters I drew were often their eyes haunted, their bodies fragile, yet defiant. Art became my sanctuary, the only place where I felt truly seen, truly understood, even if only by myself. Liam's recovery eventually stabilized, and he was able to go home. The relief in my parents' eyes was palpable. They finally allowed themselves to breathe, to relax, to celebrate. They organized a small gathering, a welcome home party for Liam, where everyone praised his bravery and my selflessness. I attended, a ghost at my own family's feast, smiling faintly as people congratulated me for saving my brother. I remember my aunt pulling me aside, her eyes filled with genuine admiration. "You're a true hero, Lara. What you did for Liam is incredible." And all I could think was, she has no idea. The bitterness was a sharp taste on my tongue. I was a hero for giving up a part of myself, but they were still asking for more. They were still blind to me. Life resumed, but it was a fundamentally altered version of what it had been before. I went back to my art, focusing on my studies, planning my escape. I started applying to universities far away, to programs that nurtured my artistic talents, places where I could finally be myself, away from the suffocating shadow of my brother, and the overwhelming disappointment of my parents. I barely spoke to my parents beyond superficial pleasantries. Liam, oblivious to the chasm that had opened between me and our parents, tried to connect sometimes. He thanked me genuinely for the kidney, told me he was grateful. I nodded, forced a smile, and tried to believe him. But the image of my parents' faces, distorted by their desperate plea to the doctor, kept replaying in my mind, a constant, looping nightmare. I couldn't shake it. It had fundamentally changed how I saw them, how I saw our family, how I saw myself. I was no longer their daughter, no longer a sister. I was a donor, a spare part, and that realization was shattering. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. I was planning to leave for university soon, to finally build a life for myself, free from their emotional manipulation and the constant feeling of being overlooked. But the anger, the betrayal, was still simmering beneath the surface. I felt like I had to do something, anything, to acknowledge what they had done, to make them understand the depth of their transgression, or at least to let them know that I knew. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have confronted them? Would you have just left and cut all ties? Or would you have tried to forgive and forget? I decided I couldn't just leave without confronting them, not entirely. It wasn't about revenge, not truly, but about closure. About asserting my own worth, my own existence for the first time in my life. A few weeks before I was due to leave for university, I called a family meeting. My parents looked surprised, a little wary. Liam, who had recovered completely and was now thriving, was also there, looking a bit confused. I sat them down in the living room, the place where countless conversations about Liam's health had taken place, and took a deep breath. My heart was pounding, my hands were clammy, but I knew I had to do this. Mom, Dad, I started, my voice trembling slightly. There's something I need to tell you. Something I heard at the hospital. Their faces immediately tensed. My mother's eyes darted to my father, a silent communication passing between them. My father shifted uncomfortably. What are you talking about, Elara? He asked, trying to sound nonchalant. I looked directly at them, my gaze unwavering. When I was in recovery, right after the surgery, I wasn't completely out. I heard you talking to Dr. Evans. I heard you ask her if you could swap my other kidney, if you could take it to save Liam, just in case he needed another one. The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father's face went ashen. Liam looked utterly bewildered, his eyes darting between us, trying to piece together what I was saying. There was a long, excruciating silence. Then, my mother started to cry, soft, racking sobs. My father finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Elara, we were just worried. We were desperate. Liam was so sick. We weren't thinking straight. I retorted, my voice rising, the carefully constructed calm beginning to crack. You were asking to dismember your daughter, to put me through another major surgery, to take another organ from my body, just in case your golden boy needed it. You weren't thinking of me at all. Not my pain, not my recovery, not my life. Just Liam. Always Liam. My mother tried to interrupt. But we love you, Elara. Of course we love you. I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Do you? Or do you just love the idea of me, the one who is convenient, the one who can provide a spare part for the son you truly adore? Liam, finally understanding the gravity of what I was saying, looked absolutely horrified. Dad. Is this true? You asked for another one of Elara's kidneys. He looked at me, then back at them, his face a mixture of shock and dawning realization. My father finally bowed his head, defeated. Yes, son, it's true. We did. We were scared. We made a terrible mistake. My mother, still sobbing, added, We're so sorry, Elara. We never meant to hurt you. We were just so focused on Liam's survival. I looked at their tear-stained faces, at Liam's stunned expression, and felt nothing. The anger was still there, a dull ache, but the overwhelming sense of betrayal had been replaced by a cold, hard resolve. It's too late for apologies, I said, my voice steady now, devoid of emotion. That moment, what I heard, it changed everything for me. It showed me exactly where I stand in this family. I gave you a piece of myself, literally, and all you saw was an opportunity to take more. I stood up. I'm leaving for university soon, and when I go, I'm not coming back for holidays, or for visits, or for anything else. My mother cried out, No, Elara, please, we can fix this. My father looked up, his eyes pleading. Liam, still shocked, just stared at me. There's nothing to fix, I said, looking from one parent to the other. Because there was nothing there to begin with. You taught me my place, and now I'm finally taking it. I'm going to build a life where I am valued for who I am, not for what I can give. I walked out of the living room, leaving them stunned and silent. Liam called out my name, a broken sound, but I didn't look back. I went to my room, packed the last of my things, and arranged for a friend to pick me up the next morning. The aftermath was exactly as I expected. My parents tried to call, to text, to reason with me. I ignored most of it. I had a few terse conversations where I reiterated my boundaries, my decision to distance myself. Liam reached out more genuinely, expressing his shock and sadness. He apologized on behalf of our parents, even though he had nothing to apologize for. I told him I didn't blame him, that he was a victim of their tunnel vision too, but that I needed space, a lot of space, from all of them. He understood, to his credit. He was growing up, finally seeing the family dynamic for what it was, through my eyes. I went to university, hundreds of miles away, and thrived. I poured myself into my art, my studies, my new friendships. I found a community of people who saw me, truly saw me, for my talents, my humor, my spirit. I dated. I fell in love. I built a life that was entirely my own, free from the crushing weight of expectation and neglect. My relationship with my parents remained strained, distant. We exchanged superficial messages on holidays, but the deep, intimate connection was gone, severed by their words in that hospital room. I never truly forgave them, not in the way that would allow me back into their lives wholeheartedly. I acknowledged their desperation, yes, but I couldn't erase the feeling of being disposable. Liam and I, surprisingly, maintained but genuine connection. He visited me at university a few times, and we talked for hours, really talked, for the first time in our lives. He expressed his guilt, his understanding of my pain, and his own struggles with being the golden child. Our relationship, ironically, became stronger after my confrontation with our parents, built on a foundation of shared understanding and mutual respect, rather than the unequal dynamic. He recognized the injustice, the profound hurt, and it changed him, made him a more empathetic person. So, that's my story. It's a harsh one, a painful one, but it's mine. I survived, I healed, and I found my own worth, even if it meant walking away from the people who were supposed to cherish me most. It was a choice between continuing to seek their approval at the cost of my own soul, or choosing myself. I chose myself, and it was the hardest, but most liberating decision I ever made. Like this video if you were on my side, if you think I did the right thing by putting myself first. Subscribe for more stories like this, where people navigate impossible choices and find their strength. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. What would you have done? Was I too harsh, or completely justified? I'll see you all in the next story.